Another huge week in news, which is why I'm putting together this video to cover all of the stories we went over this week. Trump continues to show us with his messaging he still wants Canada to be the 51st state. What's Mark Carney doing? He's making the worst trade deals possible, setting Canadians' money on fire, as well as putting in more regulations hurting Canada and your pocketbooks directly. And then we have major signs of Canada's population crashing. What does that mean about the growth that we're going to see moving forward? Because it's leading to a lot of stressed politicians, especially about the financial and economic situation of Canada. Carney was embarrassed this week. Ford had a freak out, but stick around to the end of the video where we get into some actual serious numbers of what is starting to show in Canada's economy. There's some major cracks that are setting trends for the future. We're going to keep covering this stuff, but here's the nice wrap-up video so you can watch all of the entire week together. Let's get into it. You guys might have seen this clip by now, but it has to be watched again because there are so many important things exchanged in this extremely short couple-minute video.
Welcome to Canada.
Thank you very much.
It's a great honor. Happy birthday. A few days short.
A little bit.
A few days short, but didn't have a chance to see you on the day. Happy birthday to the U.S. military as well, 250th, and this is the 50th birthday, if you will, of the G7. This marks the 50th birthday of the G7, and the G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership, and your personal leadership of the United States, many issues. Geopolitics, economic, technology, and working hand in hand with the United States, Canada and the United States, and the other G7 partners with your leadership. Very much looking forward to the meeting. I'm grateful to have you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay, so keep in mind, this guy ran his entire campaign on being the economic leader who's going to be the market maker, saving Canada and changing Canada's entire economy by taking on the guy who he's hyping up. And the elbows up crowd are all, well, you know, that's how you deal with him. He's playing him like a fiddle. He's just playing him like a fiddle. He's got him dancing in the palm of his hand. Like, the amount of cope that I'm seeing from these people has been wild, because guess what? We don't have any deals. Like, this has been going on. He's been playing them like a fiddle for a while now without any success. So, you know, you can keep saying that, but don't get me wrong. We're big America guys on the channel. So I don't have a problem with it, but this is antithetical to everything he said through the entire campaign and said even 5 days ago.
I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship, and we're going to be talking about trade and many other things. And we have a whole group of people, some traders and some other people. I see my top economy people. But we have a very talented group of people, and you do too, and I know they work together very well. I look forward to that. The G7 used to be the G8, Barack Obama and a person named...
So keep in mind, Carney just said the 50-year history of the G7. So now this is President Trump, who's, again, these are guys who are about to make economic deals, completely just undermining Carney in front of everyone.
Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in, and I would say that that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in, and you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago, but it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 9 years ago?
Look at Carney's posture, just sitting there on the side, just getting talked down to. So he just hyped up Trump, and now he, of course, he doesn't defend Trudy either, and there's not much to defend of Trudy. But, like, how embarrassing are these optics of, like, Trump, you're such a cool guy, and then him being like, you know, you guys have been messing things up for a while, and actually you could be probably to blame for Russia and the problems over there. And he's just like, okay.
8 years ago, and switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake, even though I wasn't in politics then. I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table, so it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war. Other than that, I think we're going to accomplish a lot, and I expect to. And I think our primary focus will be trade, and trade with Canada, and I'm sure we can work something out.
Yeah.
And we are seeing some insane changes coming from trade with the U.S. and other things, but also this piece of information that I'm going to get into shortly. I can't believe the clear the message that it's sending. But it's funny because getting back into the elbows up crowd now, Carney's he's playing the long game and doing all this stuff. Is the long game giving constant concessions to every single thing and then not getting a deal done?
Nostalgia isn't a strategy. We have to change with the times and to build a better world. And some of you, such as you, Mr. President, have anticipated these massive changes and are taking bold measures to address them. All of us around this table are reinforcing our militaries and security services for the new world.
Mount up.
But we all know that there can be no security without economic prosperity and no prosperity without resilience. And in a world where shocks flow across the borders, that resilience comes from cooperation around that starts.
Yeah, there's definitely some border issues, but to see Mark Carney doing these strong economic and financial deals for Canada, mount up patriots, has been hilarious because this is just the first day and he's already bending over backwards. And maybe I'm going to be eating these words a week from now and we're going to find out that Canada made the sickest deal ever. But as all of these politicians ran these campaigns and how Doug Ford said we'll never be the 51st state and how we're going to take on America economically, which of course we've all said since the beginning, Canada cannot take on the US. Economically, it is going to go poorly. And what has happened? They have proven that's the case. Let's check this out.
Doug Ford is one of 5 Canadian premiers in Boston today at the invitation of the governors of some of the northeastern states. They are looking for allies in tackling U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. Our senior reporter, Mike Crawley, is in Boston. So, Mike, what do the premiers and governors hope to accomplish there today?
Well, Dwight, I'm here inside the Massachusetts State House, the state legislature's stunning building. I'm under the Golden Dome that's at the top of this legislature building. Doug Ford is here with the 4 Atlantic premiers, as well as the governors of the New England states and New York State. They're having a series of meetings today. Right now, Doug Ford is actually having a one-on-one meeting with the governor of New York State,
Nothing to see here, just governors and premiers working together because we all know Canada and the US needs to work together. And Doug Ford, who seems to be this like real mount up patriot strong guy, even makes a hilarious comment that I want to make a point of.
The goal here is to talk about tariffs, the impact the tariffs is having, both on the economies of the states and of the provinces, and as well to try to forge some alliances to basically figure out ways that the states and the provinces can cooperate to deal with the fallout from the tariffs, and also to try to up that pressure a little bit on President Donald Trump to back off on the tariffs.
We'll get into it. It doesn't seem like he's getting that much pressure.
We actually just bumped into Premier Ford on his way to that meeting with the governor of New York State. Here's what he had to say.
And really, the number one topic is going to be tariffs. And I've always said we're stronger together. I'm going to be really pushing the AMCAN fortress and just saying we're the 2 greatest countries in the world. We'll be the strongest, wealthiest, most prosperous 2 countries. And I brought a plan of the AMCAN fortress that I'll be distributing around.
That comment made me laugh the first time I saw it because he called it the AMCAN fortress. Well, during all of these discussions about Canada becoming the 51st state or, a territory or whatever, he's been real. We're not going to do that. We're not going to get on board. And what was one of the main trends and the terms thrown around that you guys might have heard? One of them was Fortress America, because if Canada and US worked together, it would be one of the strongest economic entities in the entire world, and we would have access to critical minerals, we would have access to oil and gas. Almost every single resource that the countries would need could be dealt with domestically inside of those borders. And people were calling it Fortress America. Well, he's got AMCAN Fortress. He's got his different terminology for it. They all know Canada and the US have to work together, and more because of what's happening to Canada, not because of what's happening to the US, because we're not seeing as much pressure from the markets on Donald Trump. Let's get into a quick market update and see the pressures that America's allegedly feeling right before we get into more of the Alberta separation stuff and then the piece of information that we need to talk about. It's insane.
500 this morning. morning, getting above that 6,000 mark again. Our guest says we've seen this spectacular rally in the market, for example, from the April 8th low amid the height of tariff concerns. Let's get more now from Brian Mulberry, Client Portfolio Manager at Zacks Investment Management. Brian, thanks very much indeed for joining us. When you look at the stock market right now, what are you paying most attention to? Is there any one or two things?
Well, there's been a lot of resiliency over the last couple of weeks, even in the face of some tension. Obviously, with what happened over the weekend in the Middle East, we still didn't see a really big drawdown like we did a couple of months ago when we saw pressure from tariffs. So just resiliency is the word of the day, I think, for the moment, in that you're finding really quality companies are still doing just fine. And a lot of the really bad stuff that was supposed to have happened really didn't.
And that's kind of the point, because everybody keeps talking about, well, how America's going to feel the pressure from these tariffs. And of course, things change. There could be underlying fundamentals somewhere that I'm not seeing, other people aren't seeing. And maybe there's a crack in the system that brings everything down. But as it stands with the information we have today, America seems to be hanging on.
And so if you have a keen eye for risk and lean into higher quality factors, it seems like you can do okay in this market right now.
And that's the big takeaway. You can do okay in this market in America by just hanging in there and powering through. And I might have mentioned it before, but I watched a YouTube video on this guy taking a product and he said he wanted to make it all in America, and he found a way to do it. It was pretty insane. Speaking of American sentiment, here's what we have Americans already saying about Canada and Alberta joining them. Let's get into it.
Canada's blood has gone septic, and there is a lone exception, Alberta. And the message that I want to send to Alberta before I get into this is, Alberta, it's not the Canada that you think you know and love. The Canada, it's not there anymore, Albertans. And this is a genuine plea and a case that I want to make to people of Alberta, maybe some folks in Saskatchewan. Let's get past the trolling and the idea of being a 51st state. There's a way to make this work where you no longer have to be shackled to the communists of your country. This is an inflection point. It's a fork in the road. You have a choice to make. Canada's
a legal way, too, that we're going to get into. The Americans set up a way for this to happen.
Had a serious string of massive problems. They've had a housing crisis. They've had an immigration disaster. They've had stagnant economic growth. The other Canadian folks voted for more of the exact same thing. Albertans, take a sober look at yourself right now. You need to leave Canada. Canada is not what you thought it was. Canada is a Marxist hellhole. And by the way, Alberta, the rest of Canada despises you.
And unfortunately, for the most part, of course, he's speaking in a lot of generalities there. He is correct. And that's the thing that sucks, because Alberta is such an important province and could be even more important to Canada's success on the whole. But we just saw after the recent election that people voted for, again, this is the problem. Yes, all of those things that happened. We had housing crisis, we had economic problems, we had all of these things in Canada. And you would think that people would be ready for change after a decade of that, but they voted for more of the same. And we all know the underlying problem that's causing all of those things from happening, and that's not changing. And we're going to get into those numbers shortly. So as we see American sentiment shift where they're willing to accept Alberta, and Alberta could start building some pipeline south down through there, which would be huge for them, we need to talk about this. Did you like the video yet? Helps get these videos in front of more people. We're trying to grow the channel. Don't forget to sign up for Wealthsimple. Link is down below. You get $25, I get $25, and we take on the big banks. Let's get back to it. And this is under the American Articles of Confederation. We have Article 11, okay? And this is really important. And comment down below if you guys already knew this existed. I just found this out. Somebody commented down below. He was American. He said, hey, we have that in our Constitution. I didn't know this. Listen to this. Canada acceding to this confederation and joining in the measures of the United States shall be admitted into and entitled to all of the advantages of this union, but no other colonies shall be admitted into the same unless such admissions be agreed upon by 9 states. It's in their constitution to accept Canada as a state, and it can join the U.S. I did not know that. I just found that out, and maybe I'm way behind on this, guys. Again, comment down below if you already knew this, but that's a legal pathway for Canada as a nation. or possibly Alberta, depending on how things are going to be quantified, to join the US. And there is a ton of benefits to America taking over Alberta. That would be game-changing for the US and absolutely destructive to Canada. And we see, like you said in the video, the old Canada that everybody thinks of, it's gone. They erased it over a decade. We've almost hit a point where it's hard to go backwards when people vote for the same thing over and over. I don't see how we can get on the same page again and fix the issues. We're going to continue to see stories like these, where Belleville, Ontario remains under a state of emergency with little hope on the horizon. What's the problem? Homelessness, all of these things that they're dealing with that continue to get worse, and somehow people in Ontario continued to vote for more of this at the expense of Canadians on the whole and Albertans. And what's happening right now in Canada when it comes to our food supply? Obviously, we've talked about the dairy cartel. We just talked about the beef prices the other day, but look at this. Breaking news. New reports suggest chicken imports are surging in Canada. Canada has imported over 67 million kgs of chicken so far in 2025, up 54.6% from last year. Jumps are largely due to a shortfall in Canadian domestic chicken production, with 8 million kg underproduction recorded between April and May 2025, the worst in over 50 years. And yes, that does have to do with supply management, like we talked about in the dairy. And as we see all of these economic trade deals continue to stack one after the other, comment down below if you want to guess what the #1 country we're importing the chicken from is. I'll give you 3 seconds. It's America, the United States of America, baby. Yes, we are getting chicken from America as we continue to say we don't need them, but we are struggling to supply our own chicken. Have you guys noticed the prices of chicken? I have, and let's just say I balked at the price. That's a pun. I'm keeping it in. I don't care. I made that up on the fly. TD Leaker put out a tweet that has to do with the employment problems and why we saw such a surge in alleged labor shortages. Now you know why out of nowhere every employer had a labor shortage and immigration ballooned. Canadians couldn't find jobs and homeless encampments proliferated. So he goes on to list all of these incentives, which are direct business incentives for hiring new immigrants, asylum seekers. And yes, it's not like it covers 100% of their wages, but we already know we're seeing active LMIA scams happen in Canada that has people paying to work for companies, and then these same companies that they're paying to work for can apply for the government to also subsidize their wages. So now imagine you're one of these scam businesses we see. You're charging someone $50,000 to work for you, and then you're also having their wages subsidized by the government. And this is what Canadians continue to vote for. And if you don't believe me, look at this. We have this announcement from Justin Trudeau, Canada's handsome beau who ruined everything. Those fleeing persecution, terror, war, Canadians, we welcome you. Regardless of your faith, diversity is our strength. Welcome to Canada. Well, let's see how that turned out. This was from Ben Rabideau. He's mostly a real estate economic update guy, but anybody who's been involved with real estate for the last 10 years, myself included, knows that this has been a problem for a long time. People just feel safe talking about it now, but let's go to full display here. Total asylum claimants in Canada. Does anybody notice anything about 2025? Yeah, that number's 450,000. And these claims are going to continue to add up, and then we're going to end up with regional announcements like this. And this is important because this shows what Canada is dealing with at the micro scale, and all of this can be basically extrapolated out for the entire country.
London is among Canada's fastest growing cities, but the population projections justifying the amount of greenfield land being opened up for future residential development might be overly optimistic, according to Councillor Skylar Frank.
I think they're completely unrealistic and could cause a lot of problems down the road when we start to realize we don't have enough money to pay for this new growth.
Most of City Hall's most important planning documents involving infrastructure financing, water, mobility, and even the multi-year budget all use council-approved population projections prepared by a consultant. But the Land Needs Assessment and Urban Growth Boundary Review uses Ontario Ministry of Finance projections that predict much faster population and housing growth in the future.
And the problem is, none of them, even their projections, can even get close to the numbers that we just saw on the last slide before the story. And again, what's their problem? Oh, sewer and services and all these things that we can't keep up with because once again, you cannot outbuild the level of demand that's being created.
A staff report reads, quote, the 2024 Ministry of Finance projections are more than 51% higher than the 5-year annual average and 64% higher than the 10-year annual average of actual builds.
I think responsible growth is important, but if we don't have enough money to pay for new sewers and new roads and new sewage treatment facilities, growth will not occur.
Yes, and that's the problem. If there's no way to grow into the population growth that we are seeing, it's not economically productive. Yes, top line GDP is going to seem like it continues to go up, but that's a fake number that's not good for anybody. This makes cost of living for Canadians worse, and the only ones who have been benefiting from this entire thing have been large corporations. Speaking of, let's peek into this little story real quick.
The Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit is warning of a possible hepatitis A exposure at a Barrie restaurant. The health unit says a food handler working at the Tim Hortons on Livingston Street East has been confirmed to have hepatitis A. People who had food or drinks from that restaurant from May 17th to June 3rd could have been exposed. While the risk to contract the disease is low, people should monitor for symptoms, which can begin 15 to 50 days after. There's no ongoing risk at that restaurant. If you're looking for more detail about exposure dates and immunization clinics, you can go to the CTV website.
So let's just say that's a new trend that otherwise wasn't very popular in Canada previously. And now more than ever, I would say you should be skeptical eating at any of these chain places, any of these fast food places. The byproduct is going to be, allegedly, we're going to be eating healthier by cooking our own food. Tim Hortons' reputation is in the absolute gutter. It was a Canadian institution. Now it's not. Canadian owned, Canadian staffed, and barely Canadian supplied. So when you look at, this is, again, indicative of Canada being hollowed out by one of our most beloved institutions clearly run into the ground. And we're going to continue to see that, but the mainstream media won't call out the problems for what they are. Instead, we're going to continue to see clips like this, just with some fun, cool guys on the side of the road having a good time. Oh, okay. Huh, just a convoy of foreign flags being put up on the side of the road there. Nothing like some international 1,000-year-old blood feuds getting brought to Canadian shores, but surely it won't be a problem. But luckily, we do have another American weighing in on the problem, and we are getting called out, Canada specifically, by India. But don't worry, we're only bringing in entrepreneurs, doctors, architects, everybody, engineers you can think of, and we're going to get into some of those entrepreneurs because they're impressive.
Canada doesn't even run criminal background checks on applicants for most visas. While, in fact, if these immigrants need asylum at all, often they need asylum from law enforcement in their own countries, which is why they're coming here, or coming to Canada in this case. And this is a point that the Foreign Affairs Minister of India made himself publicly a few months ago. Even he's looking at Canada and wondering what the hell they're doing. And he warned that they are importing a lot of criminals from his country with no vetting whatsoever.
Number of gangland people, number of people with organized crime links from Punjab have been made welcome in Canada. We have been telling Canada, saying, look, these are wanted criminals from India. You have
No, I don't believe it. We only bring entrepreneurs. I'll show you in a second.
given them visas. They have come, many of them, in false documentation. And yet you allow them to live there. If you decide to import for political purposes people with very dubious, actually very negative background, there will be issues.
Oh, what a surprise. There will be issues, but I actually don't believe them because look, we've got this big story here about some just impressive entrepreneurs in Canada once again, and we're going to continue. Guys, this is a business channel. This is a finance channel. We talk about economics, all that stuff, a little bit of politics, but when it comes to entrepreneurship, I want to make sure Canadians learn the most because sure, they can call it this. I call it aggressive marketing is really what I would call it, because the group linked to aggressive marketing attempts and dozens of staged collisions in GTA. You know, we got the handsome crew there. These guys are crushing, you know, just business magnets, of course. Peel police say they have dismantled again, you guys can't use this terminology, right? It's enthusiastic and very aggressive marketing. You guys know how marketing works. It's an organization that attempts to extort hundreds of thousands of dollars from members of the community and defraud insurance companies by staging collisions across GTA roadways. You know what? These guys are real market makers. That's the important thing. Like when you're starting a business, you have to know, like, is there a market for me to get into? Because you don't want to start a business and then find out, oh, there was no consumer demand. These guys are so good at business. They created their own consumer demand. And that, to me, as a Canadian, an old stock Canadian, I wouldn't even think about these techniques that these guys use. So I'm glad they're here. They're on display showing us Canadians how to just do good business. And you know what? As we should, we got to give them their credit where credit is due. Let's read out their names here because they deserve it. We got Varun Ul, we got Inderjeet Bal, we got Abhinav Shardawaj, we got Karan Saprari, we got Manpreet Bababari, we got Simar Bababari, we got Ketan Chopra, Paritash Chopra, Inderjeet Jami, Dimpanju Garg, Kalwinder Puri, Parminder Puri, Gurinder Singh, Jovan Singh, Parwandeep Singh, Normandad Tesneet, Khalid Amjavad, and Kal Vima. Look out, Elon Musk. You are on watch for losing title of richest person in the world because we are importing this level of entrepreneurship constantly into Canada. And you came here as an immigrant too, Elon. So just know that, yes, you may have paved the way, but these guys are standing on the shoulders of giants right now. I'm going to queue up this story here because, once again, everything is President Donald J. Trump's problem. And we know that when it comes to Canada's economy, the only thing that's wrong has been Donald Trump. There's nothing we've been doing ourselves. They're trying to hurt us. Let's get into it.
But first, we want you to hear Trump's comments just hours after leaving the summit, which are casting doubt on new progress in trade talks between Canada and the U.S. The Prime Minister's office announced yesterday there could be a trade and security deal in place in just 30 days. But here's what Trump said on Air Force One overnight in response to a reporter's question about making Canada the 51st state.
I think it's a much better deal from Canada, but, you know, it's up to them. They're going to have to pay a lot of tariffs and things. They're going to have to pay a lot of money for the dome, for the Iron Dome. They want to be a part of it.
Well, Canadian government loves spending money, so, you know, I'm sure they'd be willing to sign up for extra payments.
Make a separate deal on that, by the way. We discussed that, yeah, on the dome. That may be a separate deal. They want to be at $71 billion. They're going to pay. There could be a dome.
I love that the dome has jumped from 61 to 71. I don't know if that was a mistake done by him, so I'm not going to dive into that too much. But if they jumped our cost by $10 billion overnight, that's actually so funny.
They'll be in the dome. Yeah, they'll be under the dome.
Trump mistakenly referring there to the Iron Dome, apparently meaning instead his proposed Golden Dome missile defense plan. It remains to be seen what any of those remarks will actually mean for a potential trade deal. But let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, let's explore that a little bit more, you know, because they keep talking about, well, we don't understand. We can't get this deal done. Maybe it's because Canadians aren't exactly acting on the best interest of Americans as well when we're dealing with them. That's the thing that's often left out of this conversation. That's why I keep talking about supply management and the oligopolies that we have in Canada. Stop foreign investment coming into the country, which would be better for Canadians. It would be better for consumers and better for the economy on the whole. But instead, what do? We get into this sneaky little tax here. Let's listen to what he has to say that's going on and why the Americans are also annoyed. And this is where some of the hypocrisy is shown.
On the other hand, we know that there's this thing that really irritates the Americans. Both Democrats and Republicans have been focused on this thing called the DST, the Digital Services Tax. It's a tax that American companies primarily are expected to pay, and that amount kicks in on June the 30th. And when that kicks in, there's a retroactive payment that's due. And so there's this time pressure, I think, being put on from the American side saying, you bring that around. And Democrats and Republicans, I repeat, are not pleased by this. It may put us in a position where we have to do a deal sooner rather than later. But I don't expect our government to blame
It takes a lot to get the Democrats and the Republicans to agree on something at the same time.
On the question of how do we make a deal that is good for Canada and for Canadian economy, and I know they're consulting widely with the business community, not just those that are affected, but others who are more broadly looking at how do we come out of this? And part of that, of course, is the rest of the things that the Prime Minister is also trying to achieve at the G7 will help us in that regard.
Now, as Canadians continue to want to complain, with the tariffs, they're trying to hurt us. We've had this digital service tax in place before any of this started, and yes, it is legally not designated as a tariff. However, in principle, it is indeed a tariff. It's just not applied at the border as a federal import tax, but it is because we are charging them a tax based on them not being Canadian providers and importing a service into the country. So we can say that it's just some other tax. It's just being charged differently. And that is something that the federal government, the Liberals specifically, are choosing to do. And it has Americans on both sides of the aisle annoyed that we're doing it. And as we continue to show these things, how we are not being a good neighbor to the US, is it really that hard to figure out why it's been hard to get a deal with America when we are doing these, like, it's death by 1,000 cuts with Canada and how we deal with the US? We're passive aggressive with them. Carney bends over backwards just to appeal, all of these things. And don't get me wrong, we know I'm a big US guy and I want the deal to be done. But we continue to see our ministers, like we're about to watch, make the wrong decisions and make the wrong announcements. And then we wonder, why won't we get a deal done? Let's check this out.
Hi, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. It's a pleasure for me to have the chance to talk to you directly from the Paris Air Show, which we call the Bourget, of course, directly from Paris. And we know we're living in much more uncertain times, in a dangerous world. We know that.
So let's start working with, foreign countries that are dealing with their own problems as well. We're going to try to build those relationships. It's not like there's dangerous things happening a few countries over from where we're trying to get deals done.
Also, when it comes to our own reality on the trade side and on the security side, we've been over-reliant on the US. And so therefore, we want to become closer to Europe, closer to our European partners and some key Asian partners as well. And so we are the most European of all non-European countries. That's why it was important to be here at the Paris Air Show, which is the most important forum for the aerospace sector at a time where there's so many decisions and investment made in this sector.
Yeah, well, it's been pretty funny because, again, they use all the uncertain times and all of the language because they want to keep Canadians on the back foot. And the idea of saying we've been way too over-reliant on the US, yeah, I've been way too over-reliant on oxygen to breathe. Once again, I'm going to say it 1,000 times. Canada and the US have the largest land border in the entire world. 90% of the Canadian population lives within 150 miles, basically within 2 hours of the US border. So for us to say we've been too over-reliant on the largest economy in the world that we're connected to and used to have an amazing relationship with is kind of a silly idea to try and work around. I have no problem with us expanding growth into other economies. It makes way more sense for us to find a way and put all of our energy as of right now into getting the best possible deal we could with the United States. And then once that's ironed out, the papers are signed, we could send these boneheads over to France and try and pretend like we're going to get major deals done with the EU. The EU can't get deals done with themselves. I think there's like 27 nations and they all kind of hate each other a little bit. Guys, President Donald J. Trump is not going to be there forever. America and Canada will be attached forever. Make a decision that makes sense, but they just want to continue getting us more connected with Europe. Speaking of, then we see articles like this. Canada pledges $4.3 billion in support for Ukraine as Carney and Zelensky meet at G7. This was the strange financing that I want to get into because there is something that came out here that's very weird. Prime Minister Mark Carney outlined $43 billion in new support for Ukraine's defense, and he met with Ukrainian President Zelensky, I'm not even saying his first name, on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Alberta on Tuesday. The Prime Minister's office said that the sum includes $2 billion for weapons, and it was the funny thing is the funding that Canada will count towards the NATO defense spending target. So now we're going to put that under the defense spending target. Canada is getting no benefit from that. No benefit at all. It's being sent overseas, but that's coming out of our budget. We are printing that money and that it is getting sent there, okay? This is just some weird financing stuff that's going on. Canada is also lending. This is where it gets really strange. And guys, think about what's going on here. Canada is lending Ukraine $2.3 billion to help the embattled country rebuild its infrastructure. Okay, very interesting. But what are we lending against? The Prime Minister's office said the loan will be repaid by interest charged on Russian assets frozen in Europe. That's insane. So we somehow are lending against assets that are frozen in Europe, and we're writing a loan against it, and it's going to be paying us interest against those Like, that makes no sense to me, how Canada has any level of jurisdiction on European assets that are frozen in Europe. It specifically says assets frozen in Europe. And how can we lend against that and expect repayment against that? It is some insane, weird, creative financing that needs to get dug into more, and we will find out. But this is the problem. The Liberals don't care about protecting Canadians, and they don't care about protecting their finances. And I'm just going to cover this part quickly because I'm sure you've heard about it by now, but there was a vote to audit the ArriveCan and GC strategies and get that $64 million back for Canadians and actually ban not only the company, but the people who ran the company from doing business with the government forever, which should have been done from the get-go. That's not the big, kind of news story. The news story is 100% of sitting Liberals voted nay. And you have to wonder, what possible problem could they have with trying to recover that money and banning that company? The only thing that makes any level of sense is they just don't like Canadians and they want money to be set on fire, because there's no cohesive, logical argument to me as to why the Liberals would vote against that outside of it being a conservative motion and they just didn't want it to go through. They don't care about Canada. They don't care about Canadians, and they don't care about setting that money on fire. Speaking of political updates, I kind of want to have a discussion around this one, and I would love for you guys to weigh in on it. We did finally get the announcement from, Damian Kurek about him stepping down so that they can have the by-election for Pierre to get his seat back. And, we had a pretty strong message. Today, I'm resigning my seat in the House of Commons so that the by-election can be called as soon as possible to allow for a Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, to run in Battle River Crowfoot and earn a seat in the House of Commons where he will continue fighting for Canadians and holding the Liberal government to account. And that's kind of the interesting part, because, and again, I want to hear your guys' opinion on this. I want to have a bit of discussion, and there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just curious what you guys think. This guy is part of his community, and obviously he has to step down, and he was, voted in. And again, Pierre will be voted in, assuming the election is to happen. But do you guys think that this needs to actually happen to get Pierre in there? Or is there somebody like Andrew Scheer who could do the same job that Pierre's doing and this doesn't need to happen? I don't know. You guys comment down below. Let's have a discussion about it. Speaking of federal government and holding them to account, the federal government says it will move open banking forward at the earliest opportunity. Now, there are some major concerns here, even though this is an exciting announcement, and this is why I shout out Wealth Simple so much. And don't forget, the link is down below. You get $25, I get $25. Sign up. We're taking on the big banks. And I know that this isn't like as sexy of a story, but I promise you, as a Canadian consumer, the banks are robbing you. Read the book Fleeced. The banks in Canada have the highest consumer fees in the entire world by a large margin, which means Canadians are paying way more than everyone else. Basically, in the entire world, we have almost the most expensive banking system. All of that money gets sucked out of the economy and just goes to the big banks. It's going to stifle innovation and other things, especially because the banks in Canada don't lend on small business. That's a side tangent. When we see this, as open banking is a consumer-driven banking, as Ottawa calls it, is about allowing Canadian businesses to securely share their financial data with third parties and other banks. What this is going to do is allow people to have multiple accounts across multiple banks. It's going to encourage competition. It will hopefully allow, foreign banks to come in and then the legislation to be easier. The issue is, if you look at it from a concerned citizen angle, is, okay, if the information is so much more centralized, is there going to be a time the government gets access to that and it helps with the digital IDs and, you know, social credit scores and all those things? You know, we don't know. And the other fact is, we've seen the government has been kind of just a bunch of bumbling idiots, and we're going to show a clip of them kind of being bumbling idiots again later in this video. So knowing that, it's like, all right, that is a concern. That is a thing can happen. And then we did see a hilarious update and a, you know, this was an article trying to win back some goodwill from Walmart. Walmart Canada has lowered the price on hundreds of key staple items to help Canadians save money and live better. Everyday low prices can save families, on average, more than $450 per year on their weekly shop at Walmart Canada, the equivalent of over 2 weeks of groceries. At face value, that sounds like a good announcement because, hey, we can go to Walmart and be paying less. They did talk about it being on almost exclusively their in-house products, and I don't usually like Walmart's in-house products. They're not that great at quality. The funny thing is, like, Walmart, because it's such a large employer and they supply so many people think that it's like this amazing corporation. They're currently getting government subsidies essentially to, you know, bring in foreign workers. They subsidize their wages. They are another one of the large corporations who benefits from mass immigration, both from a demand standpoint and from a keeping their wages covered standpoint. And we have a big problem story that we're going to get into shortly about what we're seeing with some of those trends. But first, speaking of consumer protection, let's hear what Doug the Liberal Slug has to say.
4 thugs come racing down my street, masks on, ready to take the car out of the driveway. Surprise, surprise, at 12:30, the 2 police cars are there. The chase is on. So they chase him. One guy runs out, takes off. They capture him, and they catch these other guys. But just imagine all the unfortunate people that don't have security there at their house with masks on, and they have all the tools ready to break in and everything, you know, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to be back out. Why don't you guys come over for a barbecue tonight? You know, I'll take care of you better than the police. And thank God the police got you and I never did. Anyways, that's my rant. I'm sick and tired of the weak justice system that we have. They have to get a backbone, and we need to start throwing these people in jail. This is turning into...
Seeing the guy stand behind him is pretty funny while he's complaining about, you know, what's going on.
A lawless society. That's my rant.
Let's see his other take on Canadian castle laws and, you know, people defending themselves, and then we'll make a quick little point before we move on.
Did you hear about the guy that these thugs came up, you know, ready to steal his car? They're all in their masks and everything. So I guess he was a hunter or something. He shot up in the air. I don't recommend that, by the way, but he gets charged. I got to find out this guy's name and number, and I'm going to hold a fundraiser for lawyer fees for him. He should get a medal for standing up. It's like down in the U.S., we should have the castle law. Someone breaks into your house, and I know any of these people here, someone breaks in your house, and they're coming after your kids, and you're coming after your spouse, you're going to fight like you've never fought before. You're going to use anything that you have.
Don't get me wrong. For once, I actually agree with Doug the Liberal Slug. However, this is a perfect example of rules for thee and not for me, because the politicians have been so detached from how Canadians have had to live for all of these years during the flood of mass immigration that it only mattered once it started to affect him personally. Once it happens to Doug, it becomes the big problem. And I think a lot of Canadians are finally waking up to the fact that we need drastic and major change in Canada to move forward, both economically and financially. So much so that we even got this kind of surprising announcement that I wanted to get into. Got to give him some credit. Got to give him some credit.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's One Canadian Economy Act is being pushed through the House of Commons this week. If passed, Bill C-5 would grant Ottawa sweeping powers on major infrastructure projects deemed of national interest. And that's not sitting well with some Indigenous leaders. CTV's Daniel Halmerson explains.
The Prime Minister's plan for One Canadian Economy is drawing criticism from some Indigenous leaders.
When we talk about one Canadian economy, First Nations people need to be at the table. We are the first peoples of this land. You need to respect that role and that responsibility that we have to the land.
Bill C.
You know, some important language used in this video so far that I'm going to say, I respect it. So they said some Indigenous leaders, because we know there are a lot who want to get on board who are featured in this video. There also is the fact that she said, you know, the indigenous people to this land, not Canada. So she's saying like, hey, Canada, you want to work with us, our nations of people, you know, make sure we're included. Which, I mean, hey, I have no problem with the inclusion as long as they're actually willing to work with Canadians. But it's like they just keep begging for these F-150s, and I told them no King Ranches. They won't stop about the King Ranch.
P5 aims to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, ease labor mobility, and speed up major infrastructure projects in response to Canada's ongoing trade dispute with the United States. The bill is being pushed through Parliament this week, and leaders like Grand Chief Kyra Wilson of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs are concerned it's happening without meaningful consultation.
They're going to need some level of like, hey guys, you get like your First Nations group to like come together and be one group, because we can't deal with a million bands of these different nations. From a reconciliation standpoint, Canada has given the Indigenous population more money than any other country in the entire world.
The feds could fast-track approval for major projects like a mine or transportation hub by labeling them as being of national interest.
Let's show a chief who is on board, and you know what? I think with what he wants, we could be in alignment with what I want as well. Let's get into it.
Other leaders like Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand aren't opposed to Bill C-5.
We are under threat right now. So our economic engines are being threatened. Our future as a country is being threatened. So there's not a doubt you will see the Métis River supporting Bill 5.
So that sounds like he's on board, and it sounds like he's being a realistic, normal guy who understands, look, our economy's not looking good, because guess what happens? If our economy does poorly, the Indigenous people are part of the same country. They are also going to get hurt by the bad economy. Like I talk about in all my videos with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, we could use the Sovereign Wealth Fund to help get them the F-150s and find ways to have that help benefit the Indigenous people so that they're included. I think if we work together, we can get these projects off the ground. Love the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but instead we waste our time with things like this, and I'm just going to let this play for a bit, and then I'm going to show you the impacts.
Mr. Chair, less than 230,000 housing starts occurred in 2024, but the government allowed in over 1 million people in the middle of a housing crisis. Why did they do this?
Mr. Chair, immigration is Canada's greatest strength, I say to you, and it is important not to blame newcomers to Canada for the housing crisis.
We can blame them. This chick is an absolute hilarious goof. It's so funny because she can never answer anything. And yeah, we actually can blame them. Well, technically we blame the government for letting them in, but they are the problem.
The honourable member.
Mr. Chair, with vacancy rates below 2% in many parts of the country, how can the minister justify bringing in hundreds of thousands more people to Canada this year?
Minister.
Very much, Mr. Chair. What I will say is post-pandemic, had we not increased our immigration levels, our economy would have absolutely shrunk.
It's actually hilarious because they just admitted that they broke the economy with mass immigration, because now we've built our entire economy to be based around mass immigration. Yeah, I think that's a problem because now we're addicted. And so guess what, guys? Yes, we absolutely need immigration to be slashed, but we do have to be prepared. They spent 5 years basically getting us addicted to immigration, so there will be some major economic blowback. And that's why all these nation building projects are so important. It makes no logical sense for us to keep bringing in these people as these problems continue to get worse. And these are the sneaky things they try to get by us, and it's so important because they keep shifting the Overton window. Government negotiates increased immigration allocation. Fredericton, the provincial government, has negotiated an increased immigration allocation with the federal government. First of all, if you're watching this from the East Coast, yikes. New Brunswick will now receive 4,250 permanent resident nominations this year, an increase of 1,500. That's insane because already they're also running into housing issues, which we're going to get into shortly. But as part of the negotiations, the government has agreed to relocate 400 asylum claimants to New Brunswick within 2 years, contingent on their consent. So basically, that's going to be almost 2,000 people. Yeah, you're bringing in bodies that the growth can't keep up with. And that's where we end up with these stories. And here's where we need to be mindful. Watch this story and see how much they've shifted the window.
It was an open house of sorts on, well, a new form of housing being proposed for the Cape Breton Regional Municipality.
It doesn't hurt to check it out, right?
15 designs ranging from single units to an apartment sixplex are being offered to residents through the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund. Gabarouse area resident Darlene LeBlanc liked what she saw for the most part, but wondered whether the proposed housing units would work as well for rural living as they might for urban.
Because they want to be able to incorporate the sewage and water, whereas where I'm rural area, I wanted to get more information on rural, because I would have to have a well and septic put in.
So these housing plans are 100% free for anybody that wants to build in the CBRM.
The CBRM says the plans were designed to meet local building codes and have been fast-tracked in hopes that people might be able to start building sooner than later in a city that has been told it needs at least 1,000 new housing units by next year.
And that's where the problem is. We've been beaten down to accept that this growth is unavoidable and we have to build in to keep up with this demand. And that's just not true. We can cut immigration and it would relieve the pressure on all of these problems. So don't accept the fact. Honestly, we can completely reject the idea that we need to rapidly build and increase more housing, because that won't do enough for the actual problem. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to accept that this growth is unavoidable, it's inevitable, and you just have to deal with it. Don't. But we have another couple quick pieces of breaking news I gotta show you. This was just a funny meme I found from an account online. I don't know this account at all, but it just came across my feed. It says the ferryman's toll, and he's like, quick, they're hiding their nukes here, get them. And then he shared a photo of Brampton, and that made me laugh out loud because he wanted to just take advantage of the situation, make a quick joke. I think we all need a laugh. And I want to cover this quickly too, even though I don't care about the problems in the desert. That can stay over there. We have, as we just saw in this video, way too many things to focus on in Canada to focus on that over there. But his delivery on this is just, it's comedy. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He's an easy target, but he's safe there. We're not going to take him out. The brackets are so funny, as if he has to explain that. That's so good. At least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention on this matter. That's the leader of the free world. That's perfect comedic delivery. I don't care what side you're on. The way he delivered that message is objectively funny. I don't care. But now let's get into the feel-good story.
On a hot day, a can of pop can provide a lot of refreshment. And depending on what happens next, it can also provide a wheelchair. Monday afternoon, 14-year-old Layla received this new high-tech chair. It's the 69th wheelchair donated by the organization since the program began 27 years ago. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of small tabs to get enough money to buy a new wheelchair. But Tabs for Wheelchairs now has 188 schools, 306 companies and groups, plus hundreds of individuals around the city and province, all saving tabs with them.
Look at how happy she was, and I was honestly so happy to see that story because I love the idea that she was able to get a wheelchair to increase her mobility. There's good things that could be happening around Canada if we were able to focus more resources on Canadians specifically, and we can't keep dividing our attention with these other problems. Now, we do have a quick BC ferry update that made me laugh because we will show how this is the direct problem of what is going on with Canada's government decision making around all of the financial and, lagging indicators they're always behind on. Let's get into it.
BC Ferries went through an extensive independent procurement process. Through that process, they arrived at a decision to award this to a shipyard in China. This is a decision they made on the basis of a fixed price contract, being able to deliver the ships in a way that families here are going to be able to depend on to get around where they need to get to. And not a single Canadian shipyard bid on the contract.
Don't worry, guys. China was able to undercut everybody.
It took 5 years to get to this process. And I will not leave families sitting on the blacktop waiting for a ferry that is broken down in the strait somewhere when they need to get to see grandma, or a business desperate to get their deliveries.
They always bring up the, what about grandma?
They're just urgently needed ferries. So it is a challenging issue. It's definitely not my preferred outcome. We've expressed our concern to BC Ferries about it, and we've got a path forward about how to address it. And I look forward to being able to ensure that the next round of ferries is built right here at home.
They had 5 years for this procurement process to take place. But after it's been completed, we've given billions to China. Now we are going to retroactively make sure that the shipbuilding capacity is increased in BC so we can build the next ones. Sure, now you're going to do it, EB. And this is the problem. Our government in Canada is always reactionary. They are never proactive. If this took 5 years to get this bidding process done, surely there could have been some front-end planning and coordinating with some Canadian shipbuilders. We've got skyrocketing population growth. We couldn't have targeted any of that to going towards the shipbuilding industry. Nah, we need some more Uber Eats drivers. It was so funny to see that. And speaking of the population growth and getting into these numbers here, here's why I want to arm you with the information. And China buying the business and all of these things is very important for what we are about to get into, because I'm going to reference that again later. But we have this thread here because all of, we've seen the news stories, Canada's population is crashing, the growth is slowing, blah, blah, blah. Let's get into some of those numbers because that's not quite correct. And here's where you're going to see things that I want you to be prepared for. Canada's population growth just fell off a cliff. Okay, what does that actually mean? New data confirms Canada's population growth rate has dropped to 1.2% year over year in Q2 2025. That's a high percent still. I want that to be upfront. After a massive immigration surge in 2022, 2023, the trend has reversed, not quite, and is falling fast. This is why we need to talk about it, because the headline data is the population growth is plummeting. That's only kind of correct because our overall numbers are still larger than the numbers we had in 2014 and 2015. And that sounds like, oh, well, that was 10 years ago. Yes, because what's happening is the baseline number they calculate the percent on is already larger. So even though the percentage is smaller, the number of people is larger. And what breaking down those number of people is even more important. And I'll get into some of that shortly, because comparing bodies to bodies, there's an important detail in that growth. All right, let's get into this. Historically, Canada saw waves of population surges, colonial migration, aka when Canada was started, post-Confederation boom, post-World War II baby boom, immigration booms in the 90s, and the 90s is an important inflection point because that's basically when the government started to rewrite Canadian history and pretend that we are a nation of international immigrants who continue to flock in. You can see it directly on the charts. It switches completely from like 97 to 2002. And then, yes, of course, in 2020, we had that extreme spike as well. But underlying trend is now locked in. Lower fertility, aging, and stagnation. This is what's important, because why does this matter? Population growth equals economic growth in today's debt-driven economy. That doesn't have to be the case. That's what Canada has got addicted to. And we've been yelling about it on the channel. You guys have been in the comments. If you've been around for a while, we know Canada got addicted to immigration because all of the growth was done through public spending and through our real estate market, which is a debt-driven economy, which was pushing everything else, and it needed constant population growth, which, we don't like saying population growth because it's basically just immigration, and we'll get into that shortly. When population growth slows, demand for housing slows. Who would have thought? Is that going to ease up on the housing market, aka the housing crisis that the government keeps talking about? Workforce shrinks. Well, we'll get into that a little bit too. Taxes fall and GDP momentum fades. That's the number that the government only cares about, is the GDP top line number. But the 1.2% year-over-year growth in 2025 is a return to pre-boom levels. That's exactly what I want to get out there because everybody's freaking out. And to be fair, the underlying economic fundamentals have been set up that we can only be prosperous in Canada from a top-line number, and we'll get into cost of living, standard of living, and the negative impacts this is having because Canada got addicted to this, because all of this has to do with how Canada has shaped its economy. This is demographic gravity pulling us back down. Immigration can only delay the trend, not reverse it. Canada's challenge now, an aging population, stretched infrastructure. Why is the infrastructure stretched? Is it because we have mass immigration? Again, this is what I really want to, let's just sit with this for a second, okay? When they were talking about the population growth, all of it was done through immigration, and it was done at record-setting levels globally when it came to population growth. Like, we were seeing insane growth that otherwise should not have happened and didn't happen anywhere else. It was just happening in Canada. What did that do? It stretched our infrastructure, rose cost of living, political backlash to rapid immigration, which is finally safe now that people are talking about, all while the credit engine is stalling. Okay, we've talked about it on the channel. I should probably talk about it more. All of our money is created through debt. So when they want the top line GDP number to grow, it's creating essentially more debt in Canada, and they need that to continue to grow so that they can grow just the overall top line number. But that's going to hurt cost of living and all of the other infrastructure that doesn't keep up with that when we just have a skyrocketing population growth. But this is actually potentially heading into a good thing because, like I've said in other videos, yes, Canada is addicted to immigration, but we can pull back on immigration. We don't need to do this. There are other ways, and we'll get into it, on how Canada can continue to grow without having to rely on mass immigration. I haven't even gotten into the demographics of the population growth yet. So we're talking about slowing demographics, falling credit growth, high debt burdens, raising social tensions, growth is harder to come by, and stability becomes fragile, which I don't know about you guys. Comment down below. It seems like there's a lot less stability these days. You can't build an economy forever on population and credit expansion, which we've been talking about on the channel. They've been using it to pad fake numbers. It has created a fake economy that has no foundation. Almost all of the growth has been through public sector jobs, jobs that grew through to debt expansion, or we had so much immigration that service-based businesses saw consumer demand increase from bodies getting brought in that they needed to hire more immigrants to service the immigrants, but that was helping no one. And yeah, it was bringing up consumer demand because every immigrant who came over had to furnish their house and they had to buy, get internet and get a cell phone and do all these things. So as that was happening, we had fake numbers. That's not real substantial growth. And the good news is that era is ending. Hopefully, the next chapter, decentralization, rebalancing, and creative destruction. Because Canada has gotten so addicted and over-reliant to just constant immigration expansion, it has stopped people from having kids. So much so, and this is why I really wanted to talk about the population growth number, because population growth and immigration are technically not the same term. There's another part of population growth, and that is natural births. In 2014, which keep in mind, our population growth, even though the percentage is lower than 2014, is still higher on overall people. In 2014, 40% of the population growth was from natural births. In the first numbers we're seeing coming out of 2025, it's 0% net natural growth on the population growth. That because our deaths have passed the births, which means currently, even though population growth encompasses natural births as well, for Canada, it's 100% immigration is our only way of population growth. And why is that? Because we've seen a decade of increasing mass immigration, which has demoralized and made it impossible to keep up because of the destruction of cost of living. We're going to get into those numbers. Let's check those out. We're going to keep ending up with charts like this, which is total population and annual growth rate. And this was shared by Rich Diaz. He does have a podcast where he's talks about the economy and a few other things with a couple other guys. And they were kind of late to the party when it came to calling out immigration. And he's talking about how this is the single most reckless economic policy in Canadian history, tripling population growth via immigration exclusively, which we've been talking about, without a thought of where to house them or any of the knock-on effects on society is finally coming to an end. And he says the working class are the ones who pay the price. It's always the case. And as they continue to pay the price, we're going to see charts like this coming out of TD's economic reports. Canada's domestic economy grinds to a halt in 2025. We have not been producing anything essentially for a decade. We have been relying on growth. The Liberal government, specifically the Trudeau government over all that time, and obviously, yes, Mark Carney is now involved in that, and he was involved for a while, but the Liberal government has been using immigration to patch every single hole. They have been using it for all of the growth, and as soon as you start to slow down that, keep in mind, it's not even being cut. It's actually still higher than before when Trudeau was in office. It's just lower than the record-setting numbers. we are seeing negative growth in domestic demand because we had only got demand from new people. And that's why other people have said it too, but I've said it on the channel. It's quantitative peopling. It was a way to bring money into the economy. And guess what? Naturally, that's very inflationary. Then what happens with the slowing demand? We have Ontario's cratering job market, February to May 2025, employment change, persons in the thousands, and we are seeing negative growth in Ontario's job market, and that is going to continue. But what's happening? Because GDP per capita continued to plummet over the last 10 years, but the top line GDP continued to grow, it meant there was more money in the system, but not enough assets and production to keep up with and help with pricing. And then we end up in these problems, the invisible poor, middle income households making up to $125,000 annually getting squeezed out of the GTHA. Well, that's a problem because the GTHA is one of the most populous areas in all of Canada. The working middle class in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, a group that includes teachers, nurses, and other essentials workers. Very funny because that is all public sector employees, okay? So the public sector employees who continue to vote Liberal this entire time are the ones getting hurt the most. It's always going to be the working class. Why are they getting hurt? Why are they getting talked about? Because we're hardly getting any level of private employment with quality jobs. What we're getting is, oh, look, there's a new shawarma place, a new Subway, a new Tim Hortons, like whatever it is. And they have become the invisible poor and could soon be squeezed out of the region due to ongoing housing crisis. Okay, this is a manufactured housing crisis, and we are seeing this in real time, even though I've been talking about it for 18 months, and you guys have been in the comments right along with me. If you've been around for around the 18 months that I've been yelling on this channel, and we've been talking about this stuff, thank you for contributing to the growth. But as these problems persist, Canada continues to make ourselves less competitive globally. With the adoption of Bill CO2, Canada's commitment to open markets will be called into question by World Trade Organization members, trade partners. It will limit Canadian negotiators' flexibility, essentially turning supply management into a political third rail. Sad day for Canada's economy. As Canada's economy starts to flounder because we are seeing a slowdown in population growth, again by percentage, we are still getting a ton of immigrants. We are making ourselves globally less competitive. I just had somebody comment on the channel. He said it was a viewer from Texas, and he said his company, who's a logistics and shipping company, specifically tries to stay away from Canada because we are one of the most over-regulated and government-controlled countries that he has to deal with in the entire world. If that doesn't say anything, I don't know what does. Speaking of being globally uncompetitive and over-regulation, this is going to be another nail in the coffin for Canada, and we will get into why shortly. Let's let them talk.
Mr. Speaker, these Liberals over here do not believe in the freedom of choice that Canadians should have when it comes to the vehicle that they drive. Right now, they have a mandate in place that makes it so that Canadians will have to buy EVs. They will have to. But that does not fit the needs of Canadian families. And especially at this time when Canadian families are struggling to make ends meet, they cannot afford the additional $20,000 that this mandate will add to their bill when they go to purchase a new car. Right now, this government has an option, and that is to vote with Conservatives to relinquish their ban on gas-powered vehicles.
Mr. Speaker, what I will do is stand up for our auto workers all across our country. We'll stand up for a strong auto industry. I will stand up to make sure that we're climate competitive and going where the world is moving, which if they actually looked at studies, globally, EV sales are up.
We will jump in on that in a second.
So if the members opposite actually care about making sure that we are standing up for our auto workers, I hope that they will stand up with us to make sure that we are protecting the industry.
Now, was the Liberal minister almost correct by saying the EV demand is continuing to grow? Yeah, almost, if you factor in China and China's demand. But guess who's also making all of the EVs that are going into the demand that she's talking about? It's China. We cannot be competitive with China in the EV market. They are already so far ahead and their prices are so much lower. That being said, every market that Canada deals with, the US, Canada itself, Europe, a bunch of other areas globally, EV demand is falling. So yeah, in Asia, we're seeing an increase in EV demand. Yeah, China is creating its own demand. They are making cheap EVs that we will not be able to compete with. So us needing to think 10 years into the future, focusing on trying to be an EV hub would be a horrible multiple choice. This could have a whole video on itself, and maybe I'll do it because that's not even factoring in the recycling problem. Brief little nugget for you. If Canada were to become an EV nation, it would take up the entire world's global capacity to recycle the batteries from just Canada and no one else. The recycling inefficiency is a huge problem on its own. When you put your blue box to the curb with your recycling in there, only 9% of that actually gets recycled, and that's just glass and plastic. Now we're trying to do batteries with toxics. There's so much to get into on why that's basically an impossible market for Canada to capture. It would be the biggest waste of government money ever, but as we're seeing with the ferries, they are so far behind and trying to be reactionary. As we're seeing, they're so far behind and trying to be reactionary, not proactive. There's so many ways around this. Speaking of reactionary and not proactive, boss babes, we are about to get into a hilarious story. Let's check this out.
A BC Supreme Court judge will now decide if the will of Janet Henry, an 84-year-old North Vancouver woman who left her $1 million fortune to a male escort in his 20s who she'd been seeing in the final months of her life, will stand, or if that money will go to her last beneficiary, her former personal trainer, or her closest living relatives, a niece and nephew in Australia. Candace Cho is
Notice, no kids were on the list.
the wills and estates lawyer in Vancouver who isn't part of the case but has read the court filings.
I think the facts in this case are more unique than my usual cases, although it's not uncustomary to have somewhat dramatic facts. We kind of joke about how it's kind of like soap operas for the dead.
The court documents outline how Henry hired Simon Garston to provide companionship and sexual services in the final year of her life. 3 months before she died in November 2021, she made him the sole beneficiary of her will, and he inherited $1 million. Henry's niece and nephew argue their aunt was unduly influenced by Garston.
So, boss babes, this is a bit of a crystal ball into your future. Yes, this 84-year-old woman was well off. She lived in North Vancouver. She had $1 million. She was so lonely and she had no kids that she was convinced first by her personal trainer, very sad, to give him all the money until she hired a male escort and then said, that guy deserves all the money. Okay, Canadians, we need to encourage families again in having kids because we cannot have 84-year-old women so sad and lonely they're giving their escorts $1 million, okay? That guy should not be rewarded for his work. Although it sounds like a tough job dealing with the 84-year-olds. You don't deserve $1 million. Boss babes, this is your warning signal. Get married, have kids. Because if you don't, listen, we understand being an entrepreneur is very important. It's very cool. And Canada's big on entrepreneurship. Actually, let's get into another entrepreneurship story.
Well, 2 men have been arrested in what Peel police are describing as a prolific alcohol theft ring. 25-year-old Anuj Kumar and 29-year-old Simarpreet Singh are facing a combined 35 charges. Well, police say Kumar is responsible.
Once again, impressive. I don't know why we're punishing the entrepreneurs. Guys, they generated $300,000 in business that otherwise wouldn't have existed.
Responsible for about $300,000 in thefts from LCBO locations across Peel this year, and Singh is considered an accomplice.
Okay, good news there with the brothers Singh. I don't know if they're brothers. Hilarious that their last names Singh again because there's a clear and obvious trend there. So much so that Premier David Eby took time to call out these gangs in Surrey. I wonder who's in charge. He calls them out directly. He acknowledges that they're from India. We know that this is a problem. So much so that even CBC is having to acknowledge these problems, these levels of foreign interference. Just listening to what they say in this video is so funny.
Report out today in Ottawa reveals Iran, China, India, Russia and Pakistan are, in the last year, were the main perpetrators of foreign interference against this country.
First of all, we were told there was no foreign interference for years. Then they finally admitted there was some foreign interference. No, it was mostly India and China. Now, coincidentally, Iran and Russia, major people on the list as well. Very interesting coincidence.
According to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, it says foreign interference in Canada continues to be, quote, pervasive, sophisticated, and persistent. The CBC's Kate McKenna joins us now live from Ottawa with more on those findings. So, Kate, this report is almost 100 pages long. What really stood out to you?
Well, this thesis report shows that Canada continues to be a target of foreign interference and espionage.
Remember, We were told this wasn't happening before.
That these bad actors are targeting businesses, governments, communities, religious communities, ethnic communities, in a variety of ways, including cyber attacks, disinformation, coercion, illicit financing, transnational repression, and more. And
So keep in mind, they're talking about how it's having impacts on communities. Turns out, if you skyrocket immigration, which is also destroying the economy, which we got into now, and you bring over multiple foreign nations in such large numbers, their populations would be bigger than most countries. There's going to be some foreign interference. Who would have thought?
It goes through these countries individually, including India. India, of course, has been in the news quite a bit over the past little while because the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, was invited to Canada for the G7 summit. He was here earlier this week. And the two countries, Canada and and India, agreed to sort of iron out some of the diplomatic challenges that they've had following Canadian officials accusing India of being involved in the death of a Canadian citizen.
No. First of all, maybe he's a Canadian citizen. Actually, you know what? I'm glad she didn't call him Canadian. There you go. We'll give him some credit.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was killed in 2023. Canadian officials have said that they believe that the Indian government has ties to his and the CSIS report says that this signifies a significant escalation in India's repression efforts and a clear intent to target North Americans.
Okay, so we just got a warning from CSIS on their clear intents to have foreign interference in Canada. We've talked about the Indian entrepreneurs and the mass Indian immigration we've been getting to Canada. Now, let's see how Mark Carney chose to react to that information.
Now, of course, a major development out of the G7 summit. India and Canada have agreed to start normalizing diplomatic relations, which had been strained since, as you mentioned, Hardeep Singh Nijjar's.
The reaction is to normalize relations. Okay, we certainly are not connected enough.
What did the Prime Minister say about this development yesterday?
Well, he talked a little bit about the meeting that he had with the Prime Minister of India. He confirmed, both countries confirmed that they will reinstate high commissioners, top diplomats in their countries after they were expelled in 2024 following the allegations that India was involved in the Canadian. That was really one of the main kind of tangible things that came out of the G.
We're rewarding them with more relationships. Hey, we know you've been alleged of this crime, but we want to reward you with more diplomatic relationship. We're actually going to appoint more commissioners. We're going to have more government involvement. This is so funny. Like, it's sad, but it's funny at the same time, because as we import their entrepreneurs and continue to have the problems, we have a destruction of the cost of living of Canada. We're going to normalize relationships with the people deporting their entrepreneurs to our country. Speaking of, I wanted to give a shout out to fellow YouTuber. His name is Gavin Barry. I talk to him online sometimes. He put out a video. It's really good. I think you guys need to look at it. You can obviously see the entrepreneur who's involved there. So I don't think there'll be any surprises on the culprits of the operation, but he spent a lot of time getting this done. First things first, we have some back-to-back stories from the government yet again, showing us they have no intention of helping Canadians or understanding how numbers work. Let's get into it.
President Trump and I agreed to pursue negotiations towards a deal within the coming 30 days. We'll continue these negotiations, of course, in good faith. In parallel, we must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present.
We saw how well he stood up against Trump at the G7. He was definitely a big dog in him there.
And that's why we're announcing that Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers. And there's several, and I'm going to list them. First, Canada will adjust its existing counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum products on the 21st of July, at the end of that 30-day period, in other words. We're going to adjust them to levels consistent with the progress that's made at that point on the broader trading arrangements with the United States.
AKA they're going to increase prices for Canadians to try and discourage them from buying American steel. Sure, I don't have a problem with wanting to support American businesses, but once again, I do not think counter-tariffing the U.S. makes any sense. We should just be doing everything we can to get a deal. And we'll see what Dominic LeBlanc, his progress on the deal is shortly.
Secondly, we will implement reciprocal procurement rules, ensuring that only Canadian producers and producers from trading partners that provide Canada with tariff-free reciprocal access through trade agreements can compete for federal government procurement of steel and aluminum.
Okay, so more regulations sounds good. Let's get into the second part of the announcement, which I thought was actually the bigger deal.
Framework for automobiles to favor the use of Canadian steel and aluminum in Canadian-made products. And finally, we're creating 2 government stakeholder task forces, one for steel, one for aluminum, to monitor trade and market trends and to better support government decision-making and workers going forward.
Prime Minister Carney, is there any way we can just approve some of these nation-building projects, get them to use Canadian steel? Those projects can go towards producing for Canada, maybe get a sovereign wealth fund together and actually have productive assets that are going to go towards our GDP? Oh, no, we can't. What you're going to do instead is create new governing bodies, one for steel, one for aluminum, just to track what's going on. Oh, McKinsey's going to take over. It's only going to cost taxpayers $10 million per industry, and they promise that they won't go over 300% of the budget. Oh, so it's only going to cost us $30 million per industry for each one of those consultancy firms and their fees. Oh, that's pretty good. I'm sure that won't get out of hand. But let's see what Minister LeBlanc has to say about his negotiations with the U.S. so far.
Of mine, but Mr. LeBlanc.
Monsieur LeBlanc.
So, thank you, Prime Minister. I'm having ongoing conversations with Secretary Lutnick. Ambassador Hillman and I met following the Prime Minister and the President's meeting in Kananaskis with Ambassador Greer and officials who were with the President in Kananaskis. We've agreed to have another meeting tomorrow. So I'm following up, as the Prime Minister said, conscious of the deadline that he and President Trump fixed. The fact that there's now a deadline set by the 2 leaders, I think, has focused the conversation. So I'm optimistic over the next 3.5 weeks that we can make some progress. And I'll be reporting to the Prime Minister as that progress unfolds.
So basically, he's announcing that they're going to announce more meetings, even though they've been meeting for months. This has been going on forever. They just had the G7 summit, which was a direct opportunity for them to meet exclusively on trade negotiations. And the best update he can give is that he's optimistic about forward progress, not an actual deal getting done. This level of bureaucracy is going to continue to leave us with issues like this. And I want to continue talking about the food professor and his continued campaign to take on Bill C-202. I called it CO2 in another video, and I found that funny. Bill C-202, in a nutshell, 1% of the Canadian economy. Oh, wow, look, 99% of the economy obviously suffering. So the Bill C-202 is a continuation of Canada's controlled supply management. We are actively trying to get trade deals done with other nations. Let's even take the US out of the picture right now. Let's just say we're trying to get deals done with Europe and Asia and these other opportunities. Bill C-202 is throwing a wrench into all trade negotiation processes because it's basically creating more regulation, it's protecting our supply management system, and it's stifling any level of innovation because all of the current farmers and all of the producers here get to go, why would we want to change anything? We don't have any levels of competition. As the lack of innovation continues, it's going to hurt you as Canadians. And right now, because of supply management, we are getting a lot of our chicken shipped in from the US and Brazil. So all the liberals out there who seem to love this, what do you think about the environmental impact of us having to ship in chicken from Brazil just because of all of these extra regulations that we have to deal with in Canada? Right now, that doesn't make sense. And liberals, for some reason, on top of not understanding long-term impacts of these things, really struggle with getting the correct numbers across. Like, look at this article here. Liberals bragged and bragged how Canadians were going to save $840 from their tax cut. But showing again, they don't know how numbers work, the average family to save $280 per year from the Liberal tax cut, and that is from the PBO, which is the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Can anybody think of any other announcements that the Liberal made around taxes and Canadians getting more money? Oh, maybe the carbon tax and how the economists lied to us for years on the actual impacts. The average Canadian family will save only $280 on their taxes next year from the Liberal government's planned income tax cut, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said in an analysis released on Wednesday. But some seniors and single Canadians are expected to save even less, prompting criticism from conservatives who argue the tax cut doesn't go far enough. Yes, obviously $280 is still better than zero, but not when you were promised $840 and not when Canadians are one of the most taxed nations in the world. The Liberal proposal would drop the tax rate to 14.5% from 15% on the first $57,375 of Canadians' taxable income this year and down to 14% next year. This promise was a pillar of the Liberal campaign during the spring federal election. Oh, would you look at that? The Liberals not living up to their campaign promises. What a surprise. At the time, Prime Minister Mark Carney's plan pitched an annual savings of $825 per dual income family. At the time, Prime Minister Mark Carney's plan pitched annual savings of up to $825 per dual income family. Finance Canada projected a maximum tax savings of $840 per couple. Wow, how exciting. But once it was broken down yet again, on a per person basis, the average tax filer is estimated to save $90 on their 2025 income taxes. And that's because the tax cut only comes halfway through the year. The PBO expects that the average will rise to $190 in savings next year. Oh, how awesome. $190 in savings. That's really going to help Canadians. I have a couple updates from last video that I want to cover because these are where the numbers are going to get important moving forward. I've seen a lot of titles like this. It looks like the insane immigration experiment is indeed over. Good. Well, it's only sort of over. Keep in mind, this population number here was 35 million in 2015. So, looks like we still have a lot of people. Over the decade, we averaged over 570,000 new people per year. So, yeah, the immigration experiment may be done from a growth perspective, but the damage still remains. Don't take your foot off the gas when it comes to the immigration problems that we have in Canada. This is an attempt to try and get steam out of the kettle because they could tell people were upset with immigration. But here's the problem. And again, like I said in last video, we got addicted to immigration when it comes to Canada's economy. We are going to see numbers moving forward. I bet you in the next 6 months, maybe in the next 12 months, if these immigration numbers stay this low, we are going to see things like, wow, we're entering a recession. We're seeing deflation. Oh, rents are going down, which is good. We want rents to go down. We want life to get more affordable for Canadians, but they're going to try and bring back immigration as a solution for it. And we need to remember moving forward, it's what caused a lot of these bubbles and problems as well. The Liberals are going to start to want to take some credit for the deflation and the lowering of inflation when it eventually does happen. We cannot give them the credit. It'll be a good thing that prices are coming down, or at the very least, going up slower. It's kind of the same thing as the mafia running an extortion ring, going up to a business and being like, hey, we used to extort you for $100 a week. We're only going to do $50. Don't we get some credit? It's like, no, you don't get any credit. It's still charging me $50. Don't allow them to take credit for problems they created and are now fixing, even though we still have a lot of headwinds to deal with. But I honestly do think there is a major recession that could be coming down the road if we keep immigration numbers low, but that has to happen so Canada can rebuild with these nation building projects. And how are we going to get these projects built? Oh, all of the entrepreneurs we keep immigrating, of course. We actually have a small update on those guys. Let's get into that quickly. So if you remember in yesterday's video, we talked about these guys with the, they call it an alcohol theft ring. I call it just infinite money glitch. It turns out Rupa shared this tweet and she said, worth noting, these two losers were arrested back in March. See screenshot. What are the odds that they're not citizens, came in as students, temporary foreign workers, and now have multiple arrests and face no threat of deportation? So not only are they wasting taxpayer dollars with the amount of times they're getting arrested, processed, having to be fed, housed, all those things. And also, I've seen tone shifting, especially from losers like Ron Butler, trying to paint these people as the victims. Oh, they were just brought in by these community colleges who took advantage of them. No, these people love scamming. It's built into the culture. Look at these new scams that are starting now. This is alleged, of course, so we can't say this is 100% happening. Most of the time, these things are proven to be true. Hello, guys. I have a relative who are committing fraud and sin in the name of sponsorship. They are both siblings, brother and sister. They have created fake marriage certificate, and the elder sister who lives in Australia has applied for spousal sponsorship for her younger brother. Gross, weird, who resides here in Canada and has no papers. I feel like what they're doing is very disgusting and unfair to those who applied genuinely. Yeah, exactly. This is the whole thing. The scammers win, and the people who follow the rules lose. I talked about it to them and they don't care at all, and I've gone ahead with the application. I want now to call the Australian Spousal Program Center and snitch on them and the fraud they are committing because it's a shameful act. Yes, you should. By the way, this is from a Reddit group called Indians in Toronto. Yes, they're always going to find a way to scam. Yes, the government is complicit. Yes, the colleges were complicit. They definitely encouraged it. But again, I've said it in the other video, there's two scenarios here. Either we brought in millions of Indians who all got duped and had no idea what they were doing, or a lot of them were scammers and just wanted to jump the front of the line. And as we see, scam after scam continue to add up. It's starting to make a little bit more sense on which one it was. And that's why even though we do have conservative MPs like Andrew Lawton speaking up saying, oh, I want the Canadian government to be tough on illegal immigration. Yes, absolutely, that is a problem. But we don't want the government to search their Canadians' mail and ban large cash transactions so that we can basically shut down the illegal immigration that's coming almost exclusively from India. How about we keep reducing the immigration numbers and you make the asylum claims tougher so that these people can stop scamming? You don't need to give all of these new powers to the government to get that across. But what does the government want to do instead? They want to push through Bill C-3. Let's get into this.
Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to the member to answer my question. I'm curious to know, and I really do want to know how we can make this House function better and work together better, because that's what Canadians want from us. They want their members of Parliament to speak to each other like members of Parliament and find ways to work together.
The honourable member.
Yeah, I'm sure she cares about what Canadians want.
Don't table junky legislation. Come on, go to the immigration minister and say there was literally months and months of testimony that could have been included in this bill, and she just pulled it off the shelf and then expected us to take it. That's not acceptable. You know, I will never back down on my responsibility to hold the government to account on behalf of my constituents. I know people don't like hearing it, but that's why I am paid to be here.
Yeah, and so just so you guys know what Bill C-3 is, essentially, I'm going to really give you the simple version. It's creating a way to have chain immigration to other countries. They want to make it so easy that a foreign person who has just spent 3 years in Canada as a citizen, whatever that means these days, so that they can just easily pass down their Canadian citizenship with essentially having no connection or ties to Canada at all. It is a complete watering down of Canada as a nation. It's horrible. One of the funny things I saw too was, oh, actually, this is going to be great at encouraging Indian Canadians from extending their citizenship to their kids and their kids. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what we need, more of them. But speaking of, why don't we talk a little bit more about Ariel Kayabaga? She's the one we saw, the Liberal minister there. Let's learn a little bit about her. Well, Ariel was selected as 2023 Young Leader by the World Economic Forum. Huh. Surprise, surprise, nothing to see there. Moving on. This is the part, in my opinion, where Mark Carney got flustered. He did not expect this. He got laughed at by everybody in Parliament, and we will show his smugness did not pay off.
That the Prime Minister has an entire department of bureaucrats trying to manage his conflicts of interest, but they can't even tell us if the Prime Minister has set up a conflict of interest screen. And so that means that the former chairman of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm is sitting at the cabinet table and could be taking decisions that personally improve his financial standing. He's been Prime Minister for 100 days, but he's still jumping through these ethical loopholes. So why won't the Prime Minister stop hiding the truth from Canadians and come clean? What are your conflicts of interest?
Yeah, pretty insane that we don't have a complete breakdown.
I would just remind the member to direct his question through the chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike member opposite, I'm proud of having experience in the private sector. I'm proud of having experience helping to build this country. I'm proud of having filed all my requirements in advance before required, including a screen for the conflict of interest. I wait on these.
He answers it so smug, and let's check this out.
Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Well, unlike the Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'm proud to have served our country in the Canadian Armed Forces in uniform. This Prime Minister seems to do whatever he thinks he can get away with. He voted for the Liberals' ban on gas-powered cars, while Brookfield is heavily invested in the EV supply chain. We know that he used offshore tax havens in the Caribbean to avoid paying Canadian taxes. His own department won't even say if he set up conflicts of interest screens. So instead of maligning people who serve the country in uniform, why doesn't he stand up and come clean about his conflicts of interest?
Although it's not as big of a deal in Canada, if he were to have done that in America, the news would be eating him up right now, and I think that flustered him.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Prime Minister, sorry.
You can tell he was flustered because he stood up, stutters, and then calls the speaker Mr. Prime Minister. And even Gurpreet right behind him is laughing there too. But let's get into what happened to Doug Ford, because I found this back-to-back clips very funny.
Well, those comments from the Premier definitely add a layer of tension to this meeting that's upcoming with 40 First Nations chiefs. I spoke with one of them on her way into Queen's Park this morning. She called the comments appalling, and she says they will be addressed during today's sit-down. This meeting is all focused on Bill 5. It comes after weeks of public pushback from Indigenous groups, some of them. This is a bill that creates...
Hey guys, how do we show them we're serious? Get the drums out!
Special economic zones where the government can choose to exempt itself from some laws, all in the name of getting projects done and economic prosperity. The Premier has said that in this meeting today, he really wants to emphasize the way that Ontario wants to collaborate with First Nations on economic prosperity. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
You can't just keep coming hat in hand all the time to the government. You got to be able to take care of yourselves. And when you literally have gold mines, nickel mines, every type of critical mineral that the world wants, and you're saying, no, I don't want to touch that. By the way, give me money. Not going to happen.
That is such a funny clip of Doug, the Liberal slug who stinks like a pug. And I knew right away when I saw those clips, I was like, he's going to be apologizing for that, even though I agree. And we're not going to get into, foreign aid and what's been going on, or how the Indigenous peoples of Canada have received more money from the Canadian government than any other country in the world has given their Indigenous peoples of Canada. Somehow they still don't have drinking water. That needs to be investigated, I would think. But don't worry, we'll see how it resolved.
Type of language shows his ignorance for the history of Anishinaabe First Peoples here. And it doesn't reflect well for moving towards a path of, economic growth for all of Ontario. And
yeah, because the Indigenous people have always been big on the economic growth in all of Ontario. And this is what happened to Doug. So that was yesterday. This is right after the meeting. This is a perfect example of the how it started, how it's going meme.
I want to say I feel we had a very productive meeting. And Grand Chief, thank you so much for coming. And what I said when I went in there, and I'm sincere about this, when I go out, and yesterday, I get pretty passionate. And I just want to say I sincerely apologize for my words, not only if it hurt all the chiefs in that room, but all First Nations.
He's just too passionate, guys.
Because we know that if we work together, and I said during the campaign, nothing moves without First Nations consultation, respecting duty to consult, and make sure that we work together.
Not shown here is the tomahawk being held behind his back while he's having to make this apology. No idea how they became such a political juggernaut in the last 10 years.
And I get passionate because I want prosperity for their communities. I want prosperity for their children and their grandchildren. And I also mentioned when I was in the meeting about when we work together, ourselves, be it the province, First Nations communities, and the federal government, we're unstoppable. And there's one person we need to stop, and it's Donald Trump. And
that's the part that I wanted to get through. Yes, he apologized. Yes, it was embarrassing. This whole thing was very funny. But of course, it all comes down to him blaming Donald Trump. And I was like, come on, Doug. You can't make it through this without bringing up Trump in this too. It's so funny. Speaking of, we had Danielle Smith going on an American news station. And I found a couple things funny about this. One of which is they just called her official. Official denies claims about Canadians wanting to join the U.S. Not accurate. First of all, she is a premier, but Americans, you're like, hey, she's a premier. And they're like, what's a premier? It's kind of like a governor. If it's a governor, why don't they just call her a governor? Okay, just go with official, guys. We'll just go there.
Canada's Prime Minister wants a new economic and security relationship with America, and he wants it within the next 30 days. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith joins me now. Madam Premier, what does your province want from any trade deal with America? I presume it's about energy.
Well, I'm glad to see that the two men seem to have a better personal relationship than the president had with our former prime minister. And I think that that is what is leading to some early resolution of some of the trade issues that we've had over the last short while. I'm hoping, of course, that we are able to get a deal so that we can start talking about getting more energy to the United States. We want to be part of the energy dominance story. We think that that America is stronger with Canada having an import of our oil and gas, which
100%. And somehow the Liberals, who keep wanting to sign off on all these nation building projects, have not announced or brought any forward when we have Danielle Smith going on American news talking about how she wants to keep building these relationships, and they can't even announce the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which everybody wants, which again, we know would help with Canadian steel problems as well. Sovereign Wealth Fund
allows you to keep prices low for your consumers and then export internationally so that you can achieve some of your security objectives. We've got critical minerals. We've got a supply and integrated food chain. We have some work that we need to do to resolve steel and aluminum and auto parts and timber. But I hope that we're closing in on a resolution.
Am I right in saying that a very large proportion of the residents of Alberta, if not a majority, but a large proportion, would like to be part of the United States?
I would say that's not accurate. We love our American friends. I think we've got the largest expatriate American community in our province.
It was so funny to watch her have to pause there for a second. I would say that's not accurate.
But part of what makes Canada different is that we were the North Americans that wanted to maintain ties with Europe and ties with Britain. And I think you see that in the character, that we have a relationship with our European counterparts, as well as a very strong relationship with the United States. So best friends, but I don't think we want to move in together.
And I do agree. I think the waters have been a little bit muddied on if people just want a sovereign Alberta, if they want Alberta to join the U.S. and all that stuff. But it was just funny. Am I presumptuous in saying all of Alberta wants to become American? Maybe a little presumptuous, and I know I was being hyperbolic there. I just found that whole interview with them a little funny, but I do think Danielle Smith does a great job representing Canada all the time. She comes off as articulate, smart, and she shows that she knows that Canada and the US needs to build Fortress America and start working together. We do have this clip from the CBC showing that either half their brain finally turned on, or the information they were hiding during the election and running cover for is finally safe to talk about. Let's get into it.
You know, when the Prime Minister says we can give ourselves far more than any other country can take away, I get the rhetorical argument there, but boy, that U.S. economy is just so massive and so big, and I just don't know if interprovincial...
So massive, so big. Anyways, why was he not saying that during the election? Why was he not saying that when we rebels up?
Trade barriers and finding domestic procurement options for steel and aluminum can offset just what, the further erosion of that economic relationship can do.
Look, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mark Carney can talk as tough as he wants, but the fact of the matter is, almost 80% of our trade is south of the border. We have to try to live through the Donald Trump years, and we can't just overnight diversify our trade to India or China or anywhere else in the world, or Europe for that matter. It's just the economies are too integrated.
Hearing them finally admit that was so frustrating because, again, I'm just some guy. And we on the channel, I've seen you guys in the comments, have been talking about this for months. Canada cannot take on the US and we cannot replace the US. What people don't understand is just the sheer size of the US economy. The US economy, one country, is 50% larger than the entire EU. The EU's like 27 countries. So when you go down the list of largest economies in the world, yeah, America's number one and by a large margin. The only one that's even remotely close is China. Do you think Canada has the ability to go into China and start to compete with them on production? We're already having problems with them dumping steel and other things in our country. And you think that we're going to China and we're going to diversify trade with them? I don't think so. The fact is, CBC knew this the entire time. They hid it during the election. We're seeing way more information come out that they were clearly biased during that time, and we cannot take on the US when it comes to an economic battle. But for some reason, Doug Ford continues to announce things like this.
Speaking in Brampton, the premier said he's confident there will be a fair trade deal between Canada and the US within the next 27 days. But if not, Doug Ford insists Ontario will keep up the pressure on the Trump administration.
But I can assure you, we will fight like we've never fought before. And if he continues with the tariffs, then we'll start slapping more tariffs on them. You know, I always say Canada, just think of Canada. We buy more products off the U.S. than Japan, Korea, China, UK, and Germany combined.
So what he just announced is we are going to try and take on the largest economy in the world, going band for band, tariff for tariff. It's a money battle. Then he goes on to say, basically, Canada is one of America's top customers. So what do you think that means, Doug, the liberal slug who stinks like a pug? If Canadians buy that much from the US and you're going to start slapping tariffs on these products, what do you think that's going to do for Canadians? Yeah, it's going to be inflationary and is going to make things more expensive. And since we don't have domestic production for a lot of these things, it's going to continue to get worse. But Doug himself loves to spend money, set it on fire, and we've got a couple stories about that today. But let's check out this article. Ontario's historic spending under Ford isn't producing results. The fundamental problem is that economic growth, key word there, words I guess, is not strong enough to provide the taxes the province requires. So if you keep spending without producing, you'll end up in a problem, Doug. But this super genius right here has obviously figured out the math to make it work, and we're taking on the US. Ontario's government's finances are a paradox. The PC government regularly boasts about historic levels of spending, but faces constant complaints about underfunding, especially from healthcare, education, and the post-secondary sectors, which we will be getting into because the post-secondary sector needs to shut it. As well, the healthcare sector was being strained by mass immigration, which we will also be getting into. In fact, the budget picture shows that revenue spending have increased dramatically since Premier Doug Ford was first elected in 2019. His first full-year budget, total government revenue was $156 billion. This year, it's projected to be $219 billion. I do want to put in a little caveat here because part of the article says, and a part of his criticism has been, you know, the GDP per capita problem and all these things. Ontario was the fastest growing province during all of these mass immigration years. So as Canada's production started to fall and we started to add in all of these people and they got stuffed all into Ontario, I'm just going to say he cannot be exclusively blamed for that, even though, you know, maybe a little bit. As we continue to see more announcements like this, and we have this announcement from Ben Rabideau, Canada's population growth slowing to 0 in Q1 was not a surprise. Anyone tracking secondary indicators. Secondary indicators, mostly retail habits, spending, stuff like that. I wrote this to institutional clients in early May. Some question this population data. I think it's for political reasons, but it's very clear to me that growth is slowing. So what he's saying is technically correct. Growth is absolutely slowing. However, for the last 10 years, we did get 6 million new people added to the population. Even though growth is currently, as of now, slowing, it doesn't mean that we don't already have millions of people who created the problems that we are about to get into. And who is to blame for keeping a lot of these problems alive and making us need to accept that these just have to be dealt with are liberal economists like Dr. Mike P. Moffitt. And I'm not saying he personally is, but the opinion pieces they put out and these types of reports that show the wrong conclusion to the information. The new CMHC studies find Canada needs to increase annual housing starts from 245K to 477K to return to 2019 levels of affordability. Of the extra 232K a year, they find that nearly 3/4 should be owner-oriented housing. Yes, do we still need to continue to build owner-oriented housing? So that needs to be things like single-family homes, or at the very least condos and apartments that have 3 bedrooms. Absolutely. However, Mike P. Moffitt has been talking about housing issues in Canada for years, and he almost never talks about the demand side of mass immigration. He always talks about building issues and community zoning and all of these things, which are problems individually. Absolutely. But the only thing that is close to a light switch that we could shut off was immigration. They were prepared for growth on growth. Like, as we talk about the 6 million, they were prepared for the 6 million to then become 6.6 million and 7 point whatever, and, just continue to build from there. It was always going to be percentage growth on a larger baseline number. So they're going, housing's never going to be able to keep up. Look what happens when we turn down the immigration crank. And even though I think we have too many people, we've obviously built the wrong product, but we're going to continue to see announcements and problems like this. Major Vancouver-based real estate developer announces difficult layoffs. So, Mike, do we need to build more housing? Because right now we're seeing demand has slowed so much that these guys have to make announcements like this. Bo Jarvis, president and CEO of Vancouver-based West Group Properties, called today one of the most difficult days in the company's history, spanning over 60 years, as the firm confirmed it has laid off an undisclosed number of employees across multiple departments. However, the scale of the layoffs appear to be substantial, given the gravity of Jarvis's remarks and in extensive measures the company undertook in an effort to avoid this income, which includes disposing of significant assets. It was always the demand side driving up the prices. However, we do have to say it was demand plus access to free money, because yes, when the Bank of Canada slashed rates to 0, yes, that's going to increase demand as well. But there has to be people to increase that demand, because it made the demand available and more accessible for more people. But we also had more people for that to get made accessible too. So that's the problem. They compound on top of each other. But now we are seeing the direct consequences of Canada being addicted to mass immigration. And this happened over 10 years. All of the plans with developers like this and companies hiring and all these things are based on future projections. That's why everything we're talking about in today's video is so important, and why I try to get these concepts out to you now, because we are going to see the effects, the ripples of these things. Even right now, this company laying off workers is not going to show this month. It's going to show later, and then we're going to start to feel the effects of layoffs. And we'll get into that when we get into the Bloomberg Economist clip, because she dropped so many truth bombs in such a short amount of time. But look at this Better Dwelling article. Canadian population growth stalls in BC and Ontario, and it makes a rare contraction. Well, where did the real estate problem manifest the worst? It was in BC and Ontario. What are we seeing? Canadian real estate soared on a runway population growth. Wow, who would have thought? Runway population growth brings up prices. And again, we talk about this all the time because it's still not in the general public. Like, I have people screaming at me in comments all the time saying, oh, it was never them. It was never them. We're seeing it. It's being admitted by everybody now. But the fuel is running low. Oh, okay, so that was the fuel. Statistics Canada data shows the population stalled in Q2 2025, making it the slowest quarters on record, one of the slowest quarters on record. And it's uncharted territory for BC and Ontario, where home prices soared based on the myth of perpetual growth, yet both provinces are now shrinking. As of right now, in Ontario and BC, it is more affordable to buy a house than it was a year ago. That is because we have had rate cuts over the last year, and prices have fallen substantially over the last year as well, especially when you compare to the 2022 peaks. Now that housing's becoming more and more affordable from the slowdown in population, does that mean we need to focus on building way more? Especially because one of the funniest arguments was always, well, we need to bring in more immigrants so that we can have access to labor in the labor shortage areas where none of them were getting into construction. We went over it on the channel. Less than 2% of immigrants were getting into construction. So now, as usual, who was hurt over the last 5 years the most in the affordability crisis? It was working class Canadians. Now, who's going to be hurt the most when it comes to layoffs moving forward as the result of this bubble being built from mass immigration, which is why I'm blaming Trudeau, and he's not walking away. Just because Carney is in charge now does not mean that Trudeau just gets to walk away with his fancy little socks on and have, putting on his little costumes and going to his dance parties, whatever he's doing. These are problems that take years to develop, and when the air gets let out, sorry, Trudy, it's your fault. Now, it was always bigger than housing. It was also consumer demand. And we have a bunch of truth bombs, like I said, in this quick Bloomberg interview we're going to get into. Then I'm going to show a couple major spending problems we have from provincial and federal governments of money getting set on fire, which again is so economically destructive. It's a major foundational problem.
Let's get more on that turndown in retail numbers, retail sales numbers in May. We've got more from city economist Veronica Clark. Veronica, thank you very much indeed. So it seems there was a slide in retail sales in May. I guess these numbers have been distorted, though, over the past few months by people front-loading or trying to get ahead of tariffs.
Yeah, exactly. The data we got this morning was the full month of April. So we'll see ultimately where May ends up in about a month. That's just the preliminary estimate from Stats Canada.
She's kind of cute. Should I message her about, slide into her DMs? We could just discuss some numbers. Come on, Veronica. I got a lot of numbers to talk about.
But yeah, I think a lot of this is going to be autos. We saw strength in auto sales in March, a lot of that in this April data this morning. And I think it's probably going to be that auto sales fall in May. This is just front loading ahead of possible, price increases from tariffs. We've seen actually very similar dynamics in the U.S. retail sales data also.
It's amazing how it's safe for them to talk about front loading now when the Bank of Canada literally said, well, we're seeing a spike in retail numbers and when these numbers came out originally. We knew they were front loading and we called it out on the channel. You guys were with me in the comments. And that's why I like when you guys comment. I learned from you guys in the comments too. But the fact is, these are not major epiphanies. They're just safe to talk about now. That's why we call things out. And that's why I'm happy that you guys are here. We call things out early and then you guys are prepared for these discussions.
Give us a bit of perspective. What over the past year or so, what have you been seeing in Canadian retail sales?
Yeah, we had seen, some of a pickup in demand really end of last year. Of course, there was the sales tax holiday over the winter, so it's kind of hard to read through those distortions also. But maybe there were signs that demand was picking up. In general, the last couple of years, we have had such strong immigration that's going to help to support aggregate spending also.
Oh, wow. So the strong immigration, as she just said, supported strong aggregate spending, which I've been saying on the channel. We've all been saying it because, yes, when you bring in consumers, they are going to need to buy furniture and cell phones and all sorts of things that we've talked about. And that's why Rogers now is panicking and Bell is panicking because they've built their plans around Canada skyrocketing new consumers. Now it's safe to talk about, the new immigrants were driving demand. Guys, that keeps prices high, and it's why we've talked about it on everything, including groceries. Where prices continue to go up, that's going to be an artificial demand in a market where we are not producing that much.
And so that, now slowing was going to be a headwind for this year, but maybe there were signs that demand was strengthening. Of course, rates had come down.
Veronica, we really got to talk and get into this.
Maybe that would help, boost investment, boost spending. But this year, the outlook as a whole, it does seem like maybe there would be, downside risk to spending just from higher unemployment, uncertainty, and all of those factors.
Again, these are things that we're catching early that will become bigger problems later.
I'm trying to think what is weighing on consumers' minds right now. Is it the uncertainty from the tariffs?
I think that can be a big part of it. Maybe not so much the tariffs themselves, but the concerns of are you going to have a job? We have seen slowing hiring. Of course, the last couple months of job growth have been much softer. The unemployment rate has risen. We're at a new cycle high of 7%. So all of those concerns around future financial situation would potentially weigh on spending. I wonder if you're seeing that also in consumers holding back on big purchases like buying a home. We've had some softer home sales for a lot of this year. It's just maybe not the environment where you make these big purchases.
So it would be disingenuous of me to not say that, of course, the trade war is going to be affecting this in some capacity as well. As with everything, these are complicated, multifaceted problems. So yes, the trade war, consumer uncertainty, all of these things have been slowing demand. And yes, unemployment rate is increasing without us having major layoffs. And we're not going to get into it, but she gets into it later in the video about how, we actually haven't seen that many layoffs yet in Canada. Most of the unemployment is because we've brought in too many people without creating enough jobs. You could do a whole separate video on how the nonsense jobs are being created in a nonsense economy just to service immigrants. But the fact is, we haven't seen that large of layoffs yet. We are starting to see them. They could be getting worse, which is why we're calling these things out now. And we need to put the pressure on the government. It's not that I want them spending, but we need to make sure the money is going to the right places and they're getting out of the way so we can start to build these nation building projects. Because if we don't, we are going to continue to end up with problems like our next video. Let's check this one out.
Well, thousands of graduates are taking part in spring convocation ceremonies this week, but they are entering a tough job market. The youth unemployment rate continues to rise. Students in one sector, though, may have more luck than others. Here's CTV's Natalie Van Roy.
And proud graduates from Algonquin College celebrated during spring convocation.
That sense of joy and satisfaction that they've completed their program, their faculty, their family, their friends are out here to support them in this amazing time.
Armed with diplomas and certificates, this
quite the crew
group from the School of Business and Hospitality ready to tackle the job market.
It's great. Especially for me, my master is from another country, so I took this course to upgrade my degree in Canada, and it feels great.
Tourism continues to boom in Canada. In 2023, the industry generated $124 billion in tourism revenue, up 18.5% from 2019.
Many of the students who go through our hospitality programs, specifically on the culinary baking side, already have jobs.
The culinary and baking side. So we are bringing in international students to become bakers. Is that high of a demand, high skill that we need to bring in international students for it?
They've been doing throughout their time with a part-time employment and are leaving and going into full-time.
I was lucky that I got a co-op in government and was in the PMO, and I did actually to use what I learned from school.
Last year,
I'm sure that girl is a nice gal, and I want what's best for her. However, do we consider it economically productive to have government-subsidized colleges providing government co-ops for international students? Because her getting a co-op role is technically at the expense of a Canadian who otherwise could have worked in that role.
I apply and I get the job.
It's been a long journey. I came all the way from Kenya to Canada to study at Algonquin, and I was able to achieve this. So I hope it's going to open many doors for me.
But not every graduate is as lucky. There are challenges in the youth job market. The unemployment rate for people ages 15 to 24 growing to 14.2% in May.
Now we all are graduated, so the next main thing is to get a full-time job. I wish everyone to get a job and get a successful career as soon as possible.
Yeah, we all wish that everybody could get a full-time job and a successful career as soon as possible. But unfortunately, they're not being created right now, sir.
An internship in project procurement analysis. And yeah, I'm hopeful to, further my career in that field.
I'm having a coughing fit for a second, so I just have to pause the screen. Don't take this time to look at the screen for too long, because I'm just coughing, guys. Don't worry. Yep, coughing, whatever. Anyways, let's move on. Long story short, Yes, that story is showing that we continue to pump international students into the Canadian job market who have skipped the line when it comes to immigration. Now, that means we have people trying to come over, following the point system, get approvals. It could take them a decade to get here. It could take them tens of thousands of dollars, when otherwise these people are generally jumping the line and they're heading into a job market where we don't need international workers. Now, what we've seen is these colleges, and this goes right back to the Doug Ford and all the spending, are complaining that they aren't getting enough funding. That college just featured got $110 million for 2025. And they're saying they don't get enough funding. If you just got $110 million, taxpayer dollars, and you're bringing in international students who are paying way more than the average tuition, and you can't make your business model work, maybe your business model needs to change. And that's why we also need to start holding the universities and the colleges accountable for not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They set money on fire. They get so many public dollars. Do not fall for it. They don't need money. It's a scam. Speaking of scams, hilarious government spending, and regulations being constant problems, let's check out these next stories. But we do have the feel-good one, don't forget. Now, these next two stories are just so indicative on, one, why we can't rely on the government actually getting anything done, and why Canada will continue to be laughed at globally and be uncompetitive. Because in Canada, in Montreal, the Canada Day Parade canceled for a second consecutive year. How is that a problem? The Canada Day Parade has been canceled for the second year in a row, with an organizer citing ongoing planning disruptions and the city worker strikes as reason behind the decision. In the media release, the parade's main organizer, Nicholas Cohen, has also pointed out strained relations with City Montreal departments as another factor. We cannot coordinate a Canada Day Parade in a major city in Canada. How do we expect foreign companies to want to invest in Canada? They won't. So then our only option is Canadian companies. They don't want to invest in Canada because we are not competitive on the global scale. We have Canadian companies going down to the States because every time the government gets involved in a project, it gets run like this. Let's watch this video real quick.
2 years late and $260 million over budget, the Pattullo Bridge is inching closer to completion. According to the steel industry, a big part of the delay was the material imported from China.
I think that if the decision had gone to Canadian fabricators, that right now there would be cars driving over the Pattullo Bridge.
Starting off this video is so funny. 2 years late and $260 million over budget. I think we should just start as a rule of thumb. If the government project is announced with a headline number, we have to assume as Canadians, it's going to be 100% higher than that, because I've never seen a government project come in anywhere near budget or timeline.
To the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, the problem was with the fabrication and engineering of the raw steel. Crews in Canada required to do extra work to meet the specifications of the project, pushing costs up and the timeline back. Advocates say had the project been tendered locally, the price would have been about the same and would have created hundreds more local jobs.
Because it was about $20 million over what the lowest bid was for steel, that's where the problems originated, because ultimately the lowest bid is usually not the best bid.
Well, good thing we're just sending another $1 billion to China for the ferries, who are obviously not going to use Canadian steel or create Canadian jobs. These are multi-year, decade-long projects to get this bridge built. And they thought it was a good idea to go with a Chinese steel supplier to build a large piece of Canadian infrastructure. This is why the Liberals, the NDP, everybody who's involved with these projects, they're fake, they're cowards, they're just absolute hypocrites, because we're elbows up, which is, again, the dumbest campaign slogan. I cannot believe Liberals got suckered into that on supporting Canada, but when it actually comes to doing it, we ship all the... No public dollars should be shipped to China like this, because it's just being printed or stolen from taxpayers and then shipped directly to China when we could be supporting Canadian.
There is potentially more at stake here than just cost overruns and delays. The Conservatives now asking the NDP for a review of the structural integrity of this Chinese steel.
We should actually do a check to see which projects throughout British Columbia are using this steel, and we should have a full investigation into it.
The Ministry of Transportation, in a statement, says delays to the construction of the new bridge were a result of major disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. It also says a full-time quality team oversaw metal fabrication in China.
The irony of hanging the Canadian flag on the Chinese steel is not lost on us, guys.
And that a quality management firm is auditing that fabrication. Harman Bangu, the Conservatives' transportation critic, wants to see local companies be given first opportunity on infrastructure projects like bridges and ferries.
Listen, they go out there and say they're Team Canada, but their actions say one thing completely different.
We have a couple scenarios here. We either have weaponized incompetence where this is being done on purpose, or they are absolute boneheads who cannot figure out how to run a basic project. The fact of the matter is, if it's a public project like this, you should be putting absolute priority on Canadian suppliers. I do not know why we'd be sending money overseas, but like I said, we got a feel-good story. Let's check out these little cuties.
There is a baby boom at the Calgary Zoo. Officials say it's an exciting time to visit because of all the new baby animals. So far this spring, the zoo has welcomed 2 river otter pups. 2 threatened wood bison calves have also been born, along with 3 critically endangered black and white ruffed lemur.
Wow, kind of looks like Zaboomafoo. You guys remember Zaboomafoo?
Pups. The zoo says each birth represents a significant stride toward a brighter future for the species, and they sure are cute.
They sure are cute, and I agree, they are cute. Speaking of, do you know what else is cute? Human babies. So if you're watching this, Canadians, you need to start having more kids. If you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to sign up for Wealthsimple. The link is down below, especially with everything we're talking about, the economy, finances, all that stuff. Now you need to protect yourself and be more aware of your budgeting than ever. So check that out and have a great rest of your day.